Welcome to Seattle Atheist Church. Welcome agnostics, atheists, wanderers, whatever you like to call yourself, you are welcome here. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural talked about from the podium. Before we get started with our topic for today, I would like to share with you the Seattle Atheist Church Creed. A creed is a set of aims or beliefs that guide an individual or organization. Seattle Atheist Church was founded on the principles of scientific naturalism and secular ethics. We attempt to make truth claims and stand ready to revise our thinking in light of new information. We try to be excellent to other conscious beings, and we believe in good, because good works in non-mysterious ways. So today we're going to have our room for 2 hours, which gives us a nice amount of time for our conversation afterwards. And I would like to say a special thank you to the members who've gone to seattleatheist.church and made a donation, because that makes all of this possible. Finally, we're going to be talking about possibly some topics that are a little bit, we have some serious topic today. And so remember that there are children in the room. I will occasionally say Baudelarized when I am sort of cutting away some things that we don't want to talk about in front of children. And I invite you to do the same. All the adults in the room basically can imagine what those topics are. So today we're going to be talking about, yes?
Can we have the parents do that, not necessarily the adults? Because the parents, I think, it makes sense.
No. Because if I'm in the room, I want to make sure that if for whatever reason a parent has stepped out or whatever, there are certain topics, because we're talking about the men's rights movement, feminism, and so on,
right, that
we're just not going to.
So what I'm saying is, as a non-parent, I don't know what it is you don't want to expose your children to. So I want to rely on you to express that. Okay. I certainly will, so you can count on that, but I also think just as an adult person, and also, by the way, if I'm not going far enough and you as a parent have a problem, obviously every parent has a right to put a stop to anything that they don't feel comfortable for their children and all of that kind of thing. But specifically, when we talk about some issues of violence, those are the things that we're not going to get explicit about. Okay. Soon we'll have, I was just talking with some people before church about the fact that we have a children's program, a children's church coming soon. And so during that we'll have children separated, kind of doing their own lessons and art and all of that good stuff. But while they're with us, we want to be somewhat careful. And you'll probably get a feel for it during the talk. So we're talking about the men's movement today, and really it's 3 separate men's movements that I'm going to be talking about today. And they somewhat overlap, but they serve different purposes. So the first men's movement is the pro-feminist men's movement, and then the mythopoetic men's movement, and finally men's rights movement. So the pro-feminist men's movement was part of the second wave of feminism. So just to put it in context, first wave of feminism, 19th century, you have women who are suffragettes, and they are fighting for the rights of women to vote, to own property. And then you have the second wave of feminism. I just want to pause for a moment. I thought that was Josh walking in. So welcome.
Oh, thank you.
Hi. Okay, so the second wave of feminism is kicked off in 1959 in France by Simone de Beauvoir's book, The Second Sex. And then in 1961 in the United States, Betty Friedan wrote The Feminine Mystique. The Feminine Mystique was a criticism of cultural gender norms of the time. She was soon joined by a wide variety of women. So the feminist movement became, because people who were interested in sociology, so issues of class, gender, sexual orientation, race, all of these things fed into the analysis. By 1970, men, especially men whose partners were in the feminist movement, had joined the movement and were, saying, hey, this makes a lot of sense to us, and we want to be part of it. So you get men like Walter Mondale fighting for childcare, access to childcare. You get, women winning the AT&T, landmark AT&T case where they gained the right to work on the telephone wires. And you have men doing things that are specifically for men. So whereas women might open a shelter for battered women and their families, the men might offer counseling for men who are having some issues. So for example, the Oakland Men's Project, which was founded in 1999, that was for to deal with issues of domestic violence and also to deal with male-on-male violence. So they work with young men specifically to stop like gang violence and things like that. Okay, and the leaders of this group are Michael Kimmel, Paul Cavell, Alan Crichton, and they all the Oakland Men's Project, which closed in about 1999, they say their work was dedicated to social change through prevention and education. They blended exercises, role plays, and an analysis exploring the links between ending oppression and male violence. And the critique was that the gender roles holding women back also held men back. For every woman who wanted to be a CEO of a major corporation, there were men who wanted to be stay-at-home dads. And that the thing that stifled one stifled the other. Now, Oakland Men's Project closed in 1999, but there are other groups which basically carry on in this same tradition. So there's a group called MEND, which I'll tell you what their mission statement says in just a moment. And here is an excerpt from a poem which was written for this nonprofit. It's by an artist called Steve Connell. I found it, came across my Facebook, and this is just an excerpt from it, okay? And so, to stay safe from danger, we raise our girls to believe they must avoid it. And we raise our boys to believe they must become it, and so they do. And then one day they grow up to discover they are the lions. They are the ones you're watching out for. They are the ones. We ask her, what did you do? When we should ask him, what have you done? But we don't, as if we can't blame him. As if it's her fault for failing to accept that being safe around men, that's not safe to expect. I mean, she got into a cage with a lion. She deserves what she got. And as men, we have to reject that mindset, or the violence won't end. We have to accept most often it starts in the hands and hearts and minds of men, and we are the lions, time and again. All right, that spoken poem, which is much longer performance piece, was viewed over 18,000 times. And the comments were about 20-1 by women, saying things like, oh, I shouldn't have said by women, because when I first read them, I didn't realize it was women saying it, and so that was kind of interesting too. I want to give you your opportunity to have your own experience of it. But comments were like, this is so powerful, I had to watch it twice. And, but I want to tell you, my reaction to that was that the whole "we are the wolves" thing, it reads to me like original sin. To equate maleness with violence and oppression, that is not a humanist position, and I reject it. Men says that they seek to end the epidemic of violence against women and girls by empowering young men and boys to become a catalyst for social change. Now that sounds good to me. Teaching anyone to be a catalyst for social change, that's humanist. But telling boys that they're the problem, that they are the lions, I have a problem with that. So just putting it out there for when we get to our discussion. Now, in general, the pro-feminist men's movement continues today. Usually we call these men just feminists. And they do a lot of really good work. We'll move on now to the mythopoetic men's movement. So mythopoetic men's movement is a completely different movement. And the leaders in this movement were Robert Bly and Sam Kean. And this movement really was going in the mid-1980s. I'm going to focus on Robert Bly. Robert Bly is a Jungian poet. And those of you who are familiar with Seattle Atheist Church know that I have brought in Jung and shadow work before, and I am positively inclined towards that. In a nutshell, the Jungian shadow idea is that we bury those parts of ourselves that we think are unacceptable to others. We feel we can't survive, we're uncomfortable with these parts of ourselves, and so we bury it deep inside of ourselves. And then the shadow manages to leak out or leap out in destructive ways at times. Now, it's important to realize that your shadow is not necessarily things that are wrong with you, just the things that you felt that you needed to discard. So you might stuff into your shadow your need for compassion, your need for creativity. And as you do this, you literally lose parts of yourself. You are literally diminishing yourself, and you lose vitality that way. So part of the way to restore that vitality is to go searching for those lost parts of yourself, to acknowledge them, reintegrate themselves into yourself. And one of the ways that we can do this is by studying archetypes in myth and writing our stories. So what Bly felt was the problem specifically for men is that they lacked strong male role models, that they've been abandoned figuratively or literally by their fathers. Father's working too much, he's not there to mentor the boy, father was shut down, he wasn't there to provide a role model on how to be a man. And also for Bly, problematically for some feminists, Bly feels that there was too much mothering. And that in civilizing boys, mothers make them ashamed of their wild impulses. So he wants boys to reconnect with a positive image of masculinity and to recapture their fierce and wild qualities. Now, he uses non-linear ways of processing, such as the storytelling and rituals, to get men to kind of have these cathartic moments. The mythopoetic men would get together and would share stories with each other about their lives, and they would usually do this by going out into the forest, sitting around a campfire. There might be some drumming at some point, there might be some steam baths, sweat lodges, swims in cold rivers, and there's like male bonding going on that is part of this healing process. Another really big part of the mythopoetic men experience is searching for mentors and positive male role models. Now, it has sometimes been criticized because they weren't all that interested in the whole picture painted by sociology. Okay? They're not analyzing class and race and gender and sexual orientation, and they are not interested in dismantling male privilege. But it's about connecting men with their own hearts and with each other, which I think can only be a step in the right direction. It allows people to let go of their defensiveness, and that when you reintegrate your shadow, parts of your shadow selves,
you become more pliable, less defensive, and able to do all kinds of work that needs to be done. I could even argue that a retreat for women to recapture our wildness would be energizing as well. But it's not a zero-sum game. Now, Robert Bly has said he is not anti-feminist, and when he talks about the real enemies of the mythopoetic men's movement, he says the most powerful enemies of the mythopoetic men's movement are the corporate men. And I quote, 3 years ago, there were hundreds of posters put up in New York saying, "You don't need to beat a drum or hug a tree to be a man." Dewar's whiskey. The corporate, knowing how much young men want to be men, says that the requirement for manhood is alcohol. It's a tiny indication of the ammunition aimed at men who try to learn to talk or feel. And then, controversially, men's groups like the Promise Keepers and the Million Man March fall in here somewhere. I myself am not really sure about that, so we can talk about that also during our discussion, whether they're part of this mythopoetic lineage or not. They certainly are not really in the pro-feminist lineage, I don't think. But nonetheless, there are men, perhaps, who consider themselves mythopoetic men who don't identify at all with this kind of right-wing element of the men's movement. Which brings us to the men's rights movements. Abbreviated MRM. And so, by the way, I forgot to kind of show you some of these books. Okay, so this is a book which is stories, which was really an interesting read. It was written by pro-feminist men and their experience working as feminist men and doing work to stop gang violence and working with young men, all that kind of thing. This is an interesting book because what it is it's a conversation in letters back and forth between the pro-feminist men and the mythopoetic men. And it's also very worth reading. And then this is the book, one of many books by Robert Bly, but this is the book that's really the linchpin for the mythopoetic men's movement, The Story of Iron John, and analyzing what that myth is all about is interesting. And finally, now, this brings us forward in time. So around 1988, a man who had been part of the pro-feminist movement named Warren Farrell wrote a book called Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say. And that's about 1998 or so, 1988. And then in 1993, he wrote the book, The Myth of Male Power. And The Myth of Male Power, have people read it? No? Okay, this book starts off the MRM men movement. The whole point of this book is to disavow that men have any special privilege in society. So I'm going to just give you 7 points that they make in this book. And this is, again, there's a lot of stuff in here that I'm kind of leaving out, but just going to hit you with 7 points so you can kind of have an idea of what it's all about. So the first thing that they say is that we treat men in our society as if they were expendable. That 97% of the military personnel are male. And we've had over 108 million people killed in war, which was over 100 million men killed in war in our last century. Now, we always want to pause when we say something like 100 million, because we want to notice that the human mind was built to understand things at a certain scale. And when you get infinitesimal, when you get really, really tiny or really, really big, it actually becomes almost like a non-measurement, because our minds can't really understand how many 100 million men are. And in addition to that, men do all the dangerous jobs, much more so than women. So policemen, firefighters, roofers, power line installers, helicopter pilots, ranchers, astronauts, bodyguards, mechanics, metalworkers, search and rescue operators, deep-sea fishermen, lumberjacks, cab drivers, miners, bush pilots, professional athletes such as boxers and football players. The list goes on. The second point is that even though a lot of medical research is done on men, it's not, we don't as a society often talk about the fact that men die earlier of all 15 leading causes of death. 1 in 7 men will get prostate cancer. 1 in 8 women will get breast cancer, but breast cancer gets 7 times more funding. Third point. They view it as a problem that boys are mostly taken care of by women. And they say, how can boys learn to be men when they're constantly surrounded all the time by women? 97% of childcare workers are women. 80% of teachers are women. And they wonder, are these women biased against boys? 11% of American children are diagnosed with ADHD, but twice as many boys than girls are given medication. And so there is some question, is this by women? Is there some pressure, especially coming from women who just don't know how to take care of boys? And that's a huge, interesting topic. They say that schools discriminate against boys. And there's lots of evidence, boys get more discipline than girls do in school. And also, boys do more poorly on reading than girls do. And when we figured out that girls were having a hard time with math, we put a lot of money towards bringing up girls' math scores. And they're wondering, where is the money to get boys' reading scores up to date? Boys are more likely than girls to drop out from high school. That might be connected to the problems with reading. And high school dropouts are more likely to end up in prison. Fifth point. 1 in 3 children are raised without a father in the home. And so, just as a huge point, fathers are important. And then they have a whole thing about fathers' parental rights and fathers' treatment in the courts around that whole thing. So, and then this is one of those things that we will bowdlerize, but I just want to touch on it, which is that boys and girl children experience the same amounts of abuse. And so often there's or at least I think probably before all of the thing that started coming out with what happened with the Catholic Church, I think before especially all of that started coming out, there was an idea that girls need to be protected from abuse like that, but that there wasn't as much an awareness of boys' situation. And also that men can be the victims of domestic abuse. And that the problem is that when these things happen to boys and men, it can often be invisible. And so it like hurts twice. It's double victimization when you're not believed or your pain is minimized. And the last point that I'm going to make is they object to the depiction of men in the media. Men are made to look ridiculous, especially in commercials. And for those of you who are in the private Facebook group, Josh sent an article about sexism in television commercials. And essentially, like, I have been aware of that too, where the wife is just treating her husband like he's a total idiot or he's incompetent. And in the one that Josh sent, the woman actually slaps the man and the whole thing is played for laughs, which is awful. And we wouldn't stand for that anymore if the roles were reversed. But it's okay because we say, well, men are a privileged class, so we can treat them that way, and nobody, it gets on TV. Now, then I read a whole lot of stuff about the feminization of men in media, and I like to talk about it, or we don't have to talk about it, it's just my thing that I was just like, I didn't know what they were talking about. Because with the exception of the men on
Modern Family, but the women on Modern Family are also as neurotic as the men. So, but the shows that I like to watch, I think, do have strong male characters. So Game of Thrones, Jon Snow, Homeland, Saul Berenson. You guys know Homeland? Just love that character. And Peter Quinn. Breaking Bad, Walter White, and Hank Schrader. The Last Kingdom's Uhtred Ragnarsson. So those are all mostly positive male role models. Not so much on Walter White, though. But very strong men. And so, yeah. And I knew a person who was in the MRM movement, and he's always complaining about Disney and Pixar movies because he says these days only the girls get to be the heroines, and, whatever. Now, okay, so there's a lot of stuff to talk about. And I want to remind everyone that we at Seattle Atheist Church, there's a book called Crucial Conversations. And every once in a while we do the Crucial Conversations training because it provides some good information on kind of like how to have discussions about potentially emotional type things. We want to be able to talk about, hard things. And so here are some guidelines. One thing that we learned from the book Crucial Conversations is that you should not expect to move people's opinions the first time you talk to them. People need to take in information, to think about it at home, mull it over, and you just push people to defensiveness if you push too hard. And you might walk away thinking, I wasted my breath, but that is not necessarily the case. Sometimes we have to have the conversation multiple times. And it requires a lot of intellectual honesty and emotional maturity to not twist each other's words, to have goodwill towards the other people when they're trying to express whatever is on their mind, and to be able to allow people to change their minds if they change their minds later. So again, just try not to be too graphic about various things. It seems actually like the kids are actually not in here and playing somewhere else, but I just wanted to call that out one more time. But thank you all for coming, and now we'll have some discussion.